All right, everyone, welcome to episode 5 of Office Hours. I'm your host, editor-in-chief of the Pamphleteer, Davis Hunt. We got a good show for you today. If you've been with us before, you know that we start off by running through the previous week of Pamphleteer coverage. I've got two special guests this week. First is Lonnie Spivak, the chairman of the Davidson County Republican Party. We talk about some of the goals of the Republican Party in Nashville, which is a very deep shade of blue. It's almost black blue, and that's not a reference to race or anything. It's just very blue. And so, what does a party that has historically not had much of a foothold in a city like this do, and what's their role, and what are some of the challenges? So I talked to him, and I'll also be talking to Jerod Hollyfield about his very good piece on red flag laws, which I think it's essentially the authoritative take on red flag laws. It blends personal anecdote with commentary from people all across the spectrum. We talked to Glenn Jacobs. We talked to his name is slipping my mind right now, but the man that wrote the book, The Forgotten History of the NRA or something like that, and a variety of other people. And it's instructive, especially in the middle of this special session, which, ironically enough, there are going to be nothing that would even come close to be categorized as a red flag law being passed. But nonetheless, that's what we will talk about. So if you're not familiar with what we do at the Pamphleteer, and this is your first time tuning in, we send out newsletters every single day in the afternoon covering Nashville politics, business, arts, and culture. The newsletter is an ancestor, I suppose, a descendant of the Alt Weekly model, albeit digitized and put on the internet. The Alt Weekly model, if you're not familiar, is there's the URL right there. The Alt Weekly model would come out once a week, once every 2 weeks. In Nashville, it's the Nashville Scene. They put out a print publication weekly, put it in a coffee shop, sell ads in it. It's a very old business model that slowly, as all other forms of physical media, is going the way of the dodo. The issues used to be thick. Now they're very thin. I worked for the guy that started the Nashville Scene, and I remember him telling me that the goal when they originally started was to have it make a nice satisfying thud when you threw it down on the coffee table. So it just had a bunch of stuff in there, and now it's almost like toilet paper. So that's the spiel. That's what's on the show today. We're going to start off running down through this last week of Pamphleteer coverage. So what you see, so as many of you probably know, we're in the middle of this public safety special session, which was called in response to the Covenant tragedy that happened at the end of March, and due to the dissatisfaction of many of residents and legislators and various other people passing laws in response to that. So they, at the end, after session ended in April, they chose, Governor Lee announced the intent to reconvene to discuss laws specifically around public safety. And he put out, I think it was 19 bullet points that outlined the parameters of legislation that they would accept. So what you're seeing here is the doll-up that Justin Pearson and Justin Jones got following their expulsion. If you can remember that far back in April, following the tragedy, Pearson, Justin Jones, and the weirdly not pictured, because I guess she's not black, Gloria Johnson occupied the pulpit on the House floor and used a megaphone to do some activism, basically. They disrupted the proceedings, and they were expelled on account of their disruption of the proceedings. It created a huge media firestorm in this state, and the protests down there were just insane. I was down there for many of the days. I have not been down to the Capitol this week. I will be down there tomorrow. I will be live tweeting the House floor session tomorrow, where both Justin Jones and Pearson will be. But in reaction, in anticipation of all this, the Republicans have put together fairly well. They established some ground rules for decorum on the floor that apply only to this session, meant to address directly what Jones and Pearson did the first time to disrupt proceedings, and have taken measures, I would say, to discourage people from convening in the Capitol. I mean, last time this was going on, at the end of, I guess it was probably the second week of April of this month. Excuse me. The area outside of the House floor was just packed with people. I mean, you couldn't. It was packed, beyond packed. My understanding is that this time they've specifically discouraged people from coming into the Capitol and mostly allowed them to stand outside, etc., to not keep it as packed. I think that's honestly a good thing. A lot of people are crying online and elsewhere about it being an infringement on their rights, you know, I just don't think that it is. I don't think I have to get into it, but I don't think that anyone has a right to stand and violate a code or something of that nature. That's kind of flimsy justification for why they would do that. But frankly, last time I was there, it was just so crowded and obnoxious, and if I was on the floor trying to get some laws passed, it'd be very distracting. It was distracting the business. It was disruptive. So it's good that they've chosen to focus it this time. What you see in this next photo is a picture. There was a big kerfuffle yesterday about during a committee meeting, which is where most of these bills are kind of being developed and heard, and coalitions built behind them. The entire room was cleared due to disruptions from the crowd. They were clapping, they were booing, they were yelling certain things, holding signs. One of the rules of decorum in this session is that you cannot bring printed material, printed signs into these rooms or meetings. And I mean, this photo is just so funny. This woman is protect kids, not guns. I can't even read her shirt, but I assume it says that. And then her phone just says it's racism. Maybe it's like a slideshow that she's holding up, and it has another slide, but it's not gun. It looks like it reads not guns, it's racism or something. I mean, it's just totally unintelligible and kind of just sets the tone for the rhetoric that's emerged in response to all this. My understanding is that there's only going to be about 5 bills that are passed that made it through Senate and will be voted on during tomorrow's House floor session. You can read about those bills in this morning's newsletter. Megan put it together. She's going to talk more about the specifics of the special session on her show tomorrow at noon, so I'm not going to waste too much time on that. So next up is I, over the weekend, had the privilege of traveling to El Salvador, where I spent the weekend, and very interesting country. A lot of things have changed. I wrote about this on yesterday, talking about some of the changes in the country that have occurred under their president, Nayib Bukele. Bukele has been, kind of demonized for violations of human rights for his very aggressive crackdown on gang violence. This graph says it all. In 2015, El Salvador had the highest homicide rate in the entire world. Starting in, Bukele was elected in 2019. There was an aggressive effort to crack down on gang violence. It was the main plank of his political platform. After a particularly bloody weekend in March of 2022, in which I think 87 people were killed, he initiated, through the approval of the Salvadoran legislature, enacted a state of emergency that gave him unilateral power to imprison people indefinitely. And they just started doing, if you were walking down the street, had gang tattoos or a gun, you were going to jail. They've locked up 70,000 people. And as you can see in this graph, 70,000 gang members, I should say. As you can see in this graph, their homicide rate is lower than Nashville's now. So it's 7.8 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. So they went from having the highest homicide rate in the world, arguably the most dangerous country in the world, with one of the more aggressive gang presences. MS-13 is the Salvadoran gang, to having a homicide rate half that of what Nashville's currently is. So, as you can imagine, the citizens there have a extremely optimistic outlook on the world. And like, just for comparison, here's Nashville's homicide rate over that same time period. It's doubled since 2013. It's gone from 6 in 2013 all the way up to 16 per 100,000. That's twice that of El Salvador, the formerly most dangerous country in the world. Memphis is even worse, of course. Memphis's homicide rate's around 25 per 100,000 right now. The national average is just about 8. And El Salvador, third world country, has a lower homicide rate than the United States this year. Here's what they did all this, these videos and this propaganda to show what they were doing with some of the violent gang members. Here's a photo of that. It looks pretty gruesome from the outset, but you have to remember that this is 1% of the population that was terrorizing the people of El Salvador. I heard from multiple people while I was there that spoke approvingly of Bukele's efforts, and I mean, his approval rating reflects that. He's got one of the highest approval ratings in the world. This is like an aggregate poll. As you can see, this is from June, polls taken from June 2022 to June 2023, with upwards of 90% of the population approving of his actions. This next one is specifically about his criminal policy regarding locking up gang members kind of without going through the standard judicial process. This top pie chart up there, 91% approve of Bukele's efforts. So when you talk to people in the country, I talk to cab drivers, just people that I would run across in restaurants, etc. People speak glowingly of his efforts, and it's totally radically changed the country. One cab driver was talking about how they had to be very specific about where they drove in San Salvador, which is the capital city of the country, and now he can go anywhere. I talked to this French, had an aristocratic air about him. Turns out he was a beverage entrepreneur, which I think is one of those things that's worthy of investigation. Like, these beverage entrepreneurs, it's a very particular type. Anyway, he talked about how when he'd go eat at this restaurant that we happened to run into him at, he used to have to go there with a caravan of 3 bulletproof SUVs. And after Bukele's actions, he can just drive there in his car, park out front, and not worry about any of that. We talked to him on the street outside the restaurant, and he said that prior to all this going on, you wouldn't even be able to stand outside like we were doing. It was that dangerous. Literally, like, to give some scale to, I'm realizing my math is wrong, actually. 0.1% of the population was being murdered every year. That's what 100 homicides per 100,000 residents is. It's an insanely high number. And what that's allowed for is Bukele's platform started out as being a hard on crime and solving that issue. And it's allowed the country to open up and start worrying about more longer term things like education and health and, developing the country and modernizing some of it and this kind of thing. It's revolutionary. And I think some people would say that what Bukele is doing is a model that will be potentially imported to other countries around Central and South America. You're seeing Argentina's president, or there's the guy running for president of Argentina has similar views, and there's chatter that he will also take some of Bukele's platform and apply it to Argentina to restore order. The thing that I just want to underscore is that Bukele's actions have been resoundingly condemned by basically everyone in Western media. But when you go to the country and talk to the people, it's life-changing for them. It's changed their lives. It's changed the country for the better. In Nashville and Memphis, similarly, as I showed you these graphs, our homicide rate, Nashville's is twice that of El Salvador. Memphis is 3 times that of El Salvador. You're safer in El Salvador, which 8 years ago was the most dangerous country in the world, than you are in Nashville or Memphis. That's wild. It feels like something of a paradigm shift. And in Memphis, obviously, for local politics, the number one concern is crime. And until that issue is solved, you've got a logjam of other things that can't be addressed. In Nashville, the Vanderbilt poll showed that that concerns about crime were second behind education, and that's from the Vanderbilt poll, which is fairly skewed in a lot of ways. Well, I think it's mostly skewed when talking about state issues. Maybe on the city, it's more accurate. Point is the top priorities for voters heading into this mayoral election were education, crime, and affordable housing. And so crime is probably the easiest one of these to solve. And that's what Bukele reveals. All you do is lock up the people committing the crimes. In 2014, there was a study done in Sweden analyzing violent crime between 1970 and 2004. And it revealed that 1% of the population of Sweden accounted for 63% of the violent crimes. Eerily enough, the El Salvadoran government, the Bukele, I didn't want to say regime, the Bukele regime or administration locked up 70,000 people in a country of 6 million, which roughly equates to just under 1%. But their homicide rate after locking up that very, very violent minority has just plummeted to the floor. And what it's expressed to observers is that allowing crime to persist is a choice. It's a choice of policy. It is not something that's endemic to urban environments. It's not endemic to the U.S. It is a choice that politicians, leaders, etc. allow crime to persist in American cities. The solution is simple. You lock up the people committing most crimes. There's the way that this stuff is typically addressed, and you see this in Nashville media, see it nationally, downplaying criminal concerns, like downplaying people's feelings of safety. You've got some human rights language mixed up in there that talks about the rights of felons and that kind of thing. But mostly people that don't want to seriously address the criminal thing are just status signaling. It's something of a status symbol to act lethargic about this. Oh, this is not my problem. I can, I live out here in the suburbs. I vacation in Tahoe. I go to, I don't know where people vacation. I don't go on near enough. I just did go on a vacation, so I can't really say that. But people that are isolated from this act like, think about it. If you live in a very rich neighborhood, you don't experience as much criminal activity, so you're kind of insulated from it, so you're unconcerned about it. And it's a status flex to be like, yeah, crime's not a problem for me. Jacob Siegel, writing for Tablet, he describes this attitude as the yawn. And he describes it well as an avoidance tactic that feigns moral and intellectual superiority, while exhibiting dullness and cowardice. It is deployed when some flagrantly abnormal thing is occurring, which the sophisticated liberal is too sophisticated to defend outright, since to do so would expose them to potential mockery and loss of status, but too cowardly to condemn, since that would risk placing them on the wrong side of progress. This is the perfect issue for this. This is a piece called The Evil of Banality. This lack of concern, acting as if crime has to exist or some condition of urban environments or of the American environment, etc. Bukele has effectively dispelled that myth. And I think it challenges a lot of people, and I think that's why he's been challenged a lot. The solution, as I said, is simple. You lock up those committing the crimes. And there's not a lot of them. It's a tiny minority of the population. So, that's all I got about this week of the Pamphleteer. Megan has her show tomorrow. Like I said, she's going to get in the weeds on the special session. Up next is my conversation with Lonnie Spivak. We talk about the Davidson County Republican Party. I recorded it earlier with him, so enjoy it. All right, today I'm talking to Lonnie Spivak. Lonnie is the chairman of the Davidson County Republican Party. There's obviously a metro general election going on right now, so we're going to talk to Lonnie about some of the challenges of running the Republican Party in a very, very blue city and some of the candidates that are up for office. Lonnie, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Davis, thanks for having me.
Of course. So yeah, what are some of the main challenges of running a Republican county level Republican Party in a city that is, very blue?
One of the big things that's hard to overcome is Republicans who are interested enough in participating in the county party tend to be those who are among the most conservative, right? And so getting them to understand, like, hey, our personal politics aren't really what's going to win here. We're going to need to pick our battles and win the races that we can win in the manner which we can win them. And then eventually, once we start picking up wins, then, we can start getting some of the more conservative candidates. Like I've run in Nashville twice. I've been beat twice. I'm too conservative to be a candidate in Nashville right now. And so when you look at the results from the general election, Nashville's not moderating. It's going further to the left. So we need to do what we can to pick up those independents, those people in the middle, the ones in the Democrat Party who are going, I don't know that I really signed up for this. And so we are not as much into the red meat as we'd probably like to be. But we're doing what we need to compete in Nashville.
Yeah, it's interesting about city level politics. You don't have to deal with the big political issues of the time as much. You don't have to talk and discuss about. The mayor is not setting, or city government is not setting policy around abortion or something like immigration that might attract a lot more enthusiasm. So what are some of the issues that you found are easy to appeal to these moderate voters that resonate with them?
Really, the two big things are public safety and parents' rights. Those are the things kind of everyone's interested in at the moment. I'd say public safety is one, parents' rights is two or three, and then just the amount of growth that we have had in Nashville and how there just hasn't seemed to be a plan to manage that growth. It's just been, how can we get as much tax dollars in as fast as possible without thinking of the ramifications for all the growth? Those are kind of the three big things that we're hearing in the county.
Public safety is a big one. Alice Raleigh's been campaigning strongly on that. Is it mostly? Is there a way that you would address public safety that's been more effective, one way or the other? Are you talking about homicide rates? Are you talking about property crime?
I'm really just as a general concept. People understand that Nashville's not as safe as it was even 3 to 5 years ago. People
Right.
are understanding that crime and violent crime is increasing, and small crimes are growing, like theft and shoplifting and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of cars being burgled, a lot of cars being broken into. They're stealing guns. They're doing those kinds of things that then they commit other crimes with the stolen vehicles and the weapons and stuff. So the public in Nashville has an understanding, look, this isn't the Nashville I remember. Every night I'm hearing a shooting on the news, or there's a police standoff, or there's gun violence on the streets, or road rage, or whatever it is. Um, People in Nashville who have been here for, a year or so understand that that's increasing. And so it's our responsibility and the candidate's responsibility to say, hey, it's the policies of the Democrats that are causing a lot of this, because they're not focusing on the small stuff, so the big stuff is growing. It's a lot of kind of what Rudy Giuliani did in New York in the 90s, where
Mm-hmm.
they had stop and frisk, and the broken window policy, where they focused on the small things and prosecuted those, and then the big things kind of work for themselves. And so until we get back to a place where we're fully funding and supporting our police, and we're able to recruit to the level that we need to, the police just don't feel like they're getting support currently, which I feel like that's why they've endorsed Alice. And so until we can get to that point where you know the police feel like, hey, if I go and arrest this guy, I'm not going to wind up being prosecuted myself. um, that's a big thing. It's a big step forward.
Is it sufficient? Do you think it's sufficient for Republican candidates in Davidson County to simply run an anti-Democrat campaign and just bring up the flaws of Democrats in other cities and bring attention to that in order to get some sort of support?
Um, we're the Republican Party platform in Davidson County, so obviously we feel like our vision and our ideas are better policy for the area going forward. Now, ultimately, we're going to let the candidates decide which path they want to take, as far as messaging and issues and whatnot, and we will then be there to support and aid where we can, and where our messaging matches up, then we'll be there to amplify and provide resources like labor for door knocking and people for phone banking and that kind of stuff.
Let's talk about how you find candidates. What's something you look for in a candidate that you think can be successful in Davidson County as a Republican?
Well, that's always tricky, right? So the state party has a litmus test for being a candidate in in Tennessee. And so we have some limits as to what we can do. Now, obviously, if we have an office that's currently being held by a Democrat, and we have a Republican running, even though they may not completely meet the the state guidelines, the state's really not going to give us any grief over putting a candidate, especially in Nashville, because they understand the demographics of this county, and any kind of win we can get is a good win. A lot of times, the candidates find us. They feel called to run. It may be something specific in their neighborhood where they're finding a development. It may be something that happened in their school, or it could just be a larger calling where they don't like the incumbent, and they just feel like they could do a better job. But the Davidson County Republican Party has a candidate committee. It's currently run by my first vice chair, Laura Nelson, and it's their responsibility to help recruit candidates to run for 5 school board races, which we'll have up this year, and any other partisan races that we may have in an upcoming election. Now, we don't always find candidates, but we will always work to develop and provide resources to candidates who step up to put their name on the ballot.
Are most of the candidates that you work with inbound, as in they're coming to you, or is there some sort of are you persuading other people to run?
We're doing both. I'd say since in the 6 months that I've been chairman, most of the candidates have come to me. They've, for whatever reason, decided they wanted to run. Of course, the Metro candidates they're not running as Republicans or Democrats, but we do our due diligence. We check everybody's voting record. We see which ones are favorable to our point of view, and then we do what we can to help them across the finish line.
Right.
And that was the case with Jennifer Webb. She won her election outright in the general election. But, we also have two candidates in district races that are in runoff, and that's Devette Blaylock in District 4 and Jeff Eastlick in District 11. Both will be great council members. The one that's really probably most surprising for me that there's a runoff and that it was as close as it was that District 4 with Devette Blaylock, because that's Robert Swope's current seat. And to show how close that got just really shows just the movement of Nashville to the left. And it's unclear yet. We haven't really been able to do a deep dive into the data from Election Day, but it's unclear if those are people who have moved into the area or just ones who were motivated to vote because of the special session. Or, I mean, it's hard to tell right now why the numbers, and it could just been it was a very interesting mayoral election. We don't know yet. It's just too soon to look at that data.
I imagine turnout for local election is it more contingent on developments in national politics, or is it responsive, as you said, to the special session?
I think it's both, right? During even year elections, when we have congressional races or Senate races or other state party races, turnout will generally be higher. I wish the legislature would make all local elections the same years as the state elections, and that would help our turnout. The other thing that we'd really kind of like to see is getting rid of the runoff elections. And that's something that'll be in committee in the general session in February. And that's in Mark Pody's committee, but it's something that I've been lobbying him for. And I really think that in some of these races where there are multiple Democrats running and we have a strong Republican running, that it could give us an opportunity to pick up some wins because they just need a plurality of votes and not a majority.
Yeah, and as regards the mayoral runoff, I know that no candidate that has won the general has lost the runoff to whoever they're running against. So it does seem a bit like a redundant exercise if you look at it that way.
In Alice's case, if you look at like 2 to 3 weeks before the general election, she really was probably in 5th or 6th place as far as the polling.
Right.
And then the last few weeks of the election cycle, she really was able to connect with voters, and that increased her turnout. And 20% for a candidate who's right leaning in a field that was so large is really a plus, and it just shows the determination and how hard she and her campaign worked. And I feel like they've got a good game plan coming out of the general into the runoff election. Her team seems to be clicking with its messaging and doing the things that they need to do. The county party, we're doing what we can to support her, and but we're not going to be like all up in your face. Hey, we're the Republican Party and we're supporting Alice, because she still needs to connect with those independent voters, and we understand the makeup of Davidson County. So we don't want to be a hindrance, but we want to help where we can.
Of course. You meant there was there's an at-large candidate in
Yeah.
the runoff.
So the at-large candidate that we'd really like to see make it, and the only one who we really feel like has a chance that that is Republican is Russ Pulley. And so, our messaging to our membership is going to be vote just for Russ Pulley. In the metro elections for at large, there's already been one member who's run outright. So if we just vote for Russ in the runoff, he'll get 4 votes for every one of our votes. So it's a force multiplier. It was the same strategy that Steve Glover used to get elected as an at-large member, and we're gonna hopefully help Russ across the finish line in the at-large race.
Well, so how can people that want to get involved in city politics or in the Davidson County Republican Party in any capacity, what can they do? How can they get involved or help?
The first thing to do really would be to go to our website, gopnashville.org. You can simply just put your email in and join our mailing list so you can see what events and activities we have going on any given month. Or you could go to the contact us and you know, if you want to be a volunteer or knock doors or make donations or really any other kind of support, um, you can do that there as well. If you're interested in serving as a precinct captain or a poll watcher, you can just email us through the website and say you'd like to do that, or you can send an email to me directly, chairman@gopnashville.org, and I'll get you plugged into the right committee, and we'll move forward. I'll tell you, we launched a new website on July 1st, and our interactions have gone up probably 300%. We probably have 5 or 6 people a day joining our email list. We have people all the time now wanting to volunteer or host events or whatever. So I really think that we're in a right trajectory, and and it's hard to tell if it's because people are just really fed up with things at the national level, or or it's because I'm doing a good job of communicating how the party is working and how to access our resources. So, but we're getting a lot of good connections with the group. We've done a good job connecting with other Republican organizations. We work very closely with the federated groups, the Nashville Young Republicans and the Nashville Republican Women. We're really doing a better job at connecting with other groups like the Log Cabin Republicans and the Tennessee Republican Assembly. It's going to take all of us. I know that not all of those groups are going to agree on everything, but it's that Ronald Reagan saying, 80% of my friend is my friend, and we're going to move on the things that we can agree on. And really, I think we can all agree that, our goal is to elect some solid Republicans who can help, change the direction that the city is going.
Great. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me. I will put a link to the website in the show notes for everyone if you want to visit there, sign up for the mailing list. Lonnie, I will not give out your personal information unless you want me to.
It's fine. You can you
Top
can
secret.
you can provide my I mean, you can provide my email address, and also, they can contact me through the website. There's an about us with a board of directors, and it has, photos of everybody with their email links and everything. So,
Well, great. Thanks so much for chatting, and I'll
all
see
right,
you around
Davis,
soon.
thanks for having me.
Of
Absolutely.
course.
Have a good evening.
All right. Well, we're back. I'm back. Next up, I'm going to be talking with Jerod Hollyfield about his article on red flag laws. If you have not read Jerod's article, on red flag laws, I highly recommend it. It's, I mean, almost as close to an exhaustive a view and perspective on red flag laws, intermingled with some personal anecdotes relaying some of Jerod's experience directly with them. And he talks with Glenn Jacobs. He talks with the author of The Hidden History of the NRA. I'm going to bring him up because I can't remember that guy's name. Oops. Jerod.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Who's the writer that you just talked with?
Oh, Frank Smythe. He's this like amazing guy to talk to. Just Jersey through and through. Has this great career doing organized crime investigations in El Salvador. He was actually kidnapped during the Gulf War when he was a war correspondent. So just amazing consummate journalist, even though he is 100% in disagreement with my politics. Just was a great conversation to have.
You know, I was talking about El Salvador at the top of the show, which is interesting. He comes across, I mean, this is totally unrelated to the conversation we're going to have, but he comes across as like that old school grizzled journalist, like the one that everyone fantasizes about being the war correspondent.
Yeah, I mean, like I've been kind of worshiping at the altar of David Carr since I've been in college, and
yeah,
this is the closest journalist. It's not this like kind of awful bugman kind of journalist. Like this guy's hardcore, and you might not agree with him, but he's straight out of the David Carr Hitchens playbook of just those guys that don't exist anymore. So I was really lucky to talk to him, and I reached out to him, and he was like in Thailand doing something, so we had this 12-hour time difference, but he was just like so happy to help. So I had really like the nice levity of this part of the article was talking to him. But yeah, I'd highly recommend the book too.
Yeah, you got some great sources for this. So riddle me this. What is a red flag law?
My favorite quote is from Dan Zelinka, who is the president of the Louisiana Shooting Club, a guy that I talked to because I read a book by that he was an interviewee in. He says, a red flag law is a misnomer. It is whatever a legislature wants it to be. So there's really, according to him, no such thing as a red flag law. It just doesn't exist.
In Tennessee state politics, it seems like it's these executive order of protections, which have no chance. Like they're all shot down. Of the bills that are going to be heard in the House floor tomorrow, none of them are red flag laws. But you know, it is useful to get perspective on what these things are. I mean, what is a red flag law? I don't know if that's probably too broad of a question. What is it not? But tell us about, tell us about your conversation with Glenn Jacobs.
Yeah, so this is an article that's been in the running. We've been really working on this since April.
Yes.
And it was something we really couldn't get representatives to talk to us about. I think it was almost like an epidemic of no one in office that is involved in this process would talk to us, even people who have talked to us before and we've had relationships with. Or I mean, for me personally, I got ghosted more than my days on Tinder through this article. It was ridiculous.
Nice.
It was really, really, really bad in that front. But Mayor Jacobs early on in this debate in April had a tweet about Baker laws and took a lot of flack for it. So I found that to be interesting that he was saying, we don't need new laws on the books. We need to enforce what's already there. And Baker law is also kind of a misnomer because they started out in Florida in the 70s, and they were basically laws that allowed for a hearing. Whenever we're talking about red flag, I mean, some of those annoying people who got kicked out of the GA this week would not want you to know this, but most of the opposition to a red flag law in general is not about the Second Amendment at all. It's about the lack of due process. That was something that Zelinka told me. That was something that Glenn Jacobs told me, that the fact that you can have this law that comes in and says, hey, you're crazy, we're taking your guns, we'll figure out the legal stuff later. And that's what they were trying to get away from. To his credit, Governor Lee did, if you've read the actual proclamation for the special session, it's this weird, unwieldy mention of these orders, executive orders of protection that is like 6-7 times as long as everything else in the bill. It's almost like a kid who's trying to explain where he was at night and is just making up this insane story about it. Like it's so weak. It was almost laughable, to be fair. I don't know what is pushing the governor to even think about this kind of stuff. And that's what my article really proved to me, is that people on both sides of the aisle, unless you're just trying to get on camera and exploit this tragedy because you were tangentially related to it, they don't agree with it. I mean, Frank Smythe is a gun owner. He is not a friend of the NRA by any stretch of the imagination. His book is damning and it is well researched. Like, it's pretty much irrefutable, the stuff that he says about the NRA, which totally had me thinking about them differently. I'm hoping to maybe get him on a show in the future. But he said, look, like, these half measures are total BS. They don't do anything but make politicians feel good. Like, our conversation needs to be, do we have people register their guns or do we not? Because we know that works. We don't know whether that passes constitutional muster, but it does in places like New Jersey. The caveat that he doesn't address is, does the administration that's in power federally, would they abuse that? I mean, that's my concern. If they're going to weaponize and call parents domestic terrorists that are just trying to figure out what's being taught in their schools or why their kids are continuing to mask or why they're having to go to the bathroom with boys who have actually had a record of sexually assaulting women in that school district, then yeah, I would say that I would be concerned about this particular administration and that issue.
And you have, I mean, you talk about this in the article, you have direct experience with that yourself, the abuse of these orders of protection, which for our audience is like, that's the red flag law that we're mostly talking about in Tennessee.
So just to kind of summarize that really quickly, red flag means anything, and it means a lot in different states. So like New York and Michigan just passed red flag laws in the last couple of years. Michigan did in May. And it basically means that if somebody thinks that you're a risk, they can take your guns. New York's has been considered unconstitutional. Colorado just passed one that was similar to that. That does not really deal with due process. And nobody cares about that law. They're just using the other laws. So it's one of these things that actually makes people think that they're doing something about gun control. A politician can say, well, I passed red flag laws. And they think, wow, okay, yeah, this is something. They're doing something about gun control. But there's no record it works. There's no record it really does anything but strips people of constitutional rights other than stuff that's already on the books, which is what Mayor Jacobs was talking about whenever he mentioned Baker laws. So in my case, we have this red flag law. We also have a beefing up of existing orders of protection, which is something like, if somebody's a threat, it's almost like a restraining order in the state of Tennessee. I will also say that Tennessee has involuntary commitment policies. So if there is a teacher that thinks a student is acting weird, if there's a parent who knows that their student, like if you think about the Newton, Connecticut, mom knew something was off in that case and didn't report it to the authorities. If a therapist thinks that somebody is a threat, they can go and talk to authorities and get this involuntary commitment situation handled, get that person some help, put them under observation. That's perfectly legal in the state of Tennessee right now. What Lee wanted to do was supercharge the existing order of protection laws. And in my case, I've had experience with that order of protection law, and it really destroyed my faith in local government, to be quite honest.
Yeah. We'll spare the details for
I mean, we can go into what you want to go into.
Well, I think that suffice it to say, someone weaponized a red flag law against you unjustly, and you were forced to pay legal fees. It was not just like this benign thing. It markedly affected your life. Right. Obviously. And the way that they're represented, it seems like it's like, oh, we've got due process built into it, yada, yada, yada. You have to show justification for issuing one in the first place. And your anecdote, which, again, I'm not going to say live on air because you got to read the article and go give us traffic on our website so we can have the numbers, is an example of how they can be abused. And so, like, how did red flag law enter the lexicon? Because you talk about this, like the flagship red flag law was the one that Ron DeSantis, it was who was the governor?
It was Rick Scott,
Scott passed following the Parkland shooting in a similar context to the Covenant, stuff. So how did red flag law become a term?
I would say a lot of think tank and consulting money went into that term. But that is the weird thing about these red flag laws is you would think Rick Scott is probably one of the most Trump-aligned MAGA senators out there. Yeah. As a governor, he was a Tea Party governor, but it was under his watch this happened. And it's something Ron DeSantis is basically playing red flag laws like Trump is playing COVID. Like, we had no part in any of this, and we're just going to pretend that, we didn't know about it and this wasn't our thing.
Right.
DeSantis, if he had those conservative bona fides, would have gone back and dismantled those. Or had a conversation about, why do we need Baker laws, red flag laws, order protection laws, and involuntary commitment laws? Why isn't all of this under one umbrella that's shored up to make sure that no one can abuse this system, and people that do abuse this system will be punished? So no politician's really talking about that in terms of these red flag laws. So it was like after David Hogg got on and started doing his thing, this was what Florida decided to do as a way to sort of iron out what happened. What I didn't get to in the article, because it was already too long, was that so many of these school shootings, especially, they happen because of the fact that the Obama administration made it much harder for school districts to expel students because of equity issues if they wanted to keep retaining federal money. So Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is an example of that. This was a student that clearly had problems that should have been involuntarily committed, but the administration was afraid of losing federal dollars because it was a case where that would be an expelled student. So most of our school shootings, whenever you hear people say, well, there were warning signs everywhere, there were, but federal bureaucracy is getting in the way of protecting people. And you don't hear those people on Capitol Hill right now yelling about that. They just want to yell about new laws.
It's like the do something, this is something, therefore we should do it line of thinking.
Right.
Without, it's totally motivated by emotion. I think if you, I'll be up there tomorrow, so I'll be able to confirm this. But from, last time, it's 95 probably percent women and moms up there doing this. And so unsurprisingly, they're, if this ever gets clipped, I'll get called a misogynist for saying this. But, they're motivated more by emotion than if than men are. That's just generally true. I think we can say that without being controversial.
And it's also weird to me too, because like in 2020 we had the whole line about the white privileged woman's tears, and now that same media is going on and throwing a camera in these women's faces and saying look at these poor moms. It's absolutely disgusting and appalling.
The weird thing about it to me with them getting expelled today or yesterday is that so they've the Covenant moms that have aligned themselves as representatives of this tragedy, like unlike the Parkland thing where it was Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg, it was students. The students are too young, so it's their moms stepping up and taking advantage of it. And I'm more sympathetic to, as insufferable as David Hogg is, I'm more sympathetic to his reaction and resulting activism than I am for some reason the mothers. And I don't know, that's not a reflection of my disdain for mothers at all. It just reeks of just kind of star seeking in a way. They've been granted this special status, and when you can see in the clips when they're talking to them after they get expelled after breaking the rules in that subcommittee meeting or that committee meeting, they're genuinely shocked that someone is finally treating them like they're equal to everyone else and not this a class apart because of their involvement in the school.
Yeah, and I think what's funny is, I know during this debate, when I was starting the story, I reached out to those moms, especially the main one that was on the media, and was like, I want to talk to you. I want you to articulate your position on what we should do. I offered multiple times, and she ended up blocking me because of the fact that I asked her to articulate her position and promised her a forum where we would hold it in a debate, just like the article that I wrote. So I find it laughable that they then went to DC and got outside interest involved and turned this into a whole money laundering operation based on their scared children, and then exploited their scared children. They're scum. Yeah. They're absolute scum.
Yeah, you're less charitable than I am.
No, I'm not going to be charitable about it.
I know. You go harder than I do on this. So one thing about red flag laws. Sorry.
I just call it like I see it. I mean, this is a very you give somebody a forum. They've been screaming for 4 months. I want a forum. No one's listening to me. Here, I will quote you at length. I will transcribe it verbatim. What do you believe? Yeah. What position? And they can't do it. They just want the attention.
No, I know. I mean, you're 100% right. That's why I'm laughing. It's like a gut punch. So one interesting anecdote you had is you talk about New York's extreme order protection laws and how burdensome they've become for law enforcement in that state. Could you go into some of that, because I think that's kind of an under discussed dimension of this.
Yeah, and this is kind of, I'm just going to offend everybody today, but In my case, in Tennessee, my problem was the police and the courts just did not do their job. Absolutely did not do their job. They got a false claim. The person who took it said, I'm sorry, this is not anywhere rising to the level of this order. They delivered it anyway, the police did. They treated me like a common criminal, and then whenever the courts got a hold of it, they didn't do anything to the person because they knew that the person that they would be able to charge with the crime wasn't the one that was really involved. It was a relative of hers that was instigating this whole thing.
Right.
So, not saying that all police don't do their jobs. I'm just saying that's a breakdown that happened in Tennessee. What's happened in New York City is they went from 600 orders of extreme protection or extreme protection orders before the red flag law was rebranded and passed to over 4,000 in 1 year. Like in a year's time, that's how much they increase. So it's like a 6-7 time increase. When you're thinking about clearance rates of crimes, when you're thinking about all of these issues, that's a lot of extra work on police, some of whom are badly trained, some of whom are really good cops but are overwhelmed. And there has not been anything to, add extra training for cops, add raises for cops to attract better cops, raise the education requirements for police officers. Any of these things that would help them deal with an increase like this is not something that's really the concern of the New York legislature or Governor Hochul. Just not happening in New York City, especially, and in the surrounding area. What's also funny, and I did not put this in the article, and it was also something that didn't make the news, but I'm over in Carthage, close to Putnam County. There was a guy on Facebook who was showing all of these makeshift bombs he had made and guns and basically threatening the Putnam County State Fair. Someone reported it to the police. The police got on it. They got this guy, intercepted him after he bought all this stuff at a Walmart and arrested him. And his plan was to go and shoot up the fair. That was a situation when laws on the books actually worked. They didn't need to wait for a special session to take action. Those were good cops that paid attention to what was going on. They cared about their community. They knew their community well enough. They lived in their community because they could afford it. And they took care of this guy. This guy is in prison awaiting trial right now.
Yeah,
where was that in the news anywhere related to the special session?
Yeah. I mean, another unmentioned part of the special session is like the genesis of it was the Covenant tragedy, and we've written extensively. I've commented on my connection to the church, and obviously not at all am I trying to downplay the horror of that. But Memphis has like serious problems that were. I mean, I was talking about at the top of this show. El Salvador used to have the highest homicide rate in the world in 2015. It's now below. It's a third of Memphis's homicide rate now as a result of so you would think that if the thing was about public safety and people were actually concerned for their safety, that they would endorse locking up criminals instead of this kind of like abstract like policy stuff it seems too like fine combed to actually do any good. Like the way that you address crime and safety concerns is you punish criminals. I mean, it's not complicated. And it feels like a vanity thing for people to advocate for this like sophisticated legislation or gun confiscation and that kind of thing.
Do you remember last year in the legislature, there was Memphis City Council had basically passed a law that wanted all police officers to live in Memphis. Well, most police officers didn't want to live in Memphis. They wanted to live in Arkansas, or they wanted to live in Mississippi and come to work, or they wanted to live outside of the city line. So the mayor actually had to work with an East Tennessee Republican to try to get this law passed. And all of the Memphis representatives were freaking out about it. And that's something else that I think is important for Nashville to keep in mind, especially is in order to have good cops, you have to support good cops.
Yes.
You have to make sure that the cops want to live there, that the cops can afford to live there, that you're just not arbitrarily raising property taxes because you're mad at bachelorettes and billionaires. So that's a major concern too, that we really need to think about is where are these officers coming from? How are we supporting them? And are our bureaucratic policies prohibiting them from doing their job? And more importantly, prohibiting us as a culture, as a local or state government from getting the best people for the job. And that's important, as important to me as any of these changes in gun control laws, or just basic education of how to actually use what's on the books. I'm
going to they're like Freddie O'Connell recently, because you referenced him there. He had an ad recently that I'm gonna pull up. Let's see here. Let's stretch the window. Like, look at this. You got to stretch the window. This is this is kind of an attack ad on O'Connell, but let's watch this. Oops.
Even the internet knows he's boring.
Point in showing that is that, like, Freddie has, oh shit, sorry, I subtracted you. Point in showing that is Freddie is clued into this. And could you see that ad? I was off camera.
Not quite. No, I didn't really. I got the Alice part. Was it an Alice ad or a Freddie ad?
It was an anti-Freddie ad. Oh, it's a PAC ad. Fortunately, none of the local journos watched this show. Otherwise, they would have gotten a sneak peek at something that's going to air in a couple of weeks. What I was saying is that O'Connell has, like, adopted this kind of faux pro-police thing, even though his voting record shows that he, and his policy positions on this stuff are just weak and subpar. So it's clear that these like kind of safety concerns, broadly speaking, outside of red flag laws, are resonating with people, and O'Connell knows that, and he's playing to it. So anyway, it's an irrefutable thing. You can't avoid the fact that people are concerned for their own safety, and like downplaying that is just a losing proposition.
Right, and I mean, how many cops were not able to live in the Nashville city limits anymore after Cooper raised their property taxes?
Yeah. Correct.
So, I mean, these are issues to keep in mind that, cops are.
You know what Freddie's, like, response to criticism about raising property taxes, which he will do. He will raise property taxes. It'll be one of the first things he does. And he'll use it to fund transit or some other mobility initiative. Is he wants to subsidize people that can't afford to pay their property taxes with tax money. Like, he wants to raise the property tax and then subsidize payments for those that can't afford it. I mean, that's insane. That's like robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Well, what I don't understand about any of these people in power, and I think Governor Lee's included here because I find him quite spineless on many issues from COVID on. I don't know why there wasn't a serious primary challenge to him, but this is a good example of people that are in power that don't read the laws, that don't look at what's already on the books, that don't look at the causes and effects of various policies, and they just want to pass things to seem like they're doing something. They'll give it a fancy name. They'll do whatever else that they can do to try to make it look in the public eye, to make the optics look great, when they're really doing nothing. And in a lot of ways, they know that the specter of this fear is going to allow them and people like them to stay in office. Because if they're too good at their jobs, then they're not going to be around for the long haul.
Would you prefer a politician who gives the veneer of doing something but actually does nothing, or a very effective politician that actually passes laws against your favor? Like, I kind of prefer the incompetent guys. The guys passing, like, bloviating about, their signature piece of legislation that does nothing. Like, that's like an old American ethic. Like, keep the politicians from getting together and passing laws.
I mean, I would rather have neither, especially since, the entire point of our court system in America is not for people to have justice. It's to bleed people until they give up. That's the kind of system that Republicans and Democrats have been responsible for creating. Like, you sue somebody so that you can scare them off, so you know that they're going to already say, all right, if I fight this, I'm going to have $1,000, $3,000 in legal bills, or I could call and settle it now.
Yeah.
That's why we have the court system. It doesn't really do anything else. I mean, it's a very disgusting thing that politicians leave that untouched every single time.
Yep.
You have very few people, even in the right-wing, MAGA wing of the party, like, they're much more concerned with throwing up DeSantis primary videos or whatever else than actually looking at the law. I mean, I personally think it's because a lot of them can't understand it. That's why they hire their staffs, and their staffs have other motives because they want to stay in politics after that. But that's just my personal opinion. but
Yeah,
something we need to take care of. I mean, somebody at some point needs to get some of these laws together, look at them, see, do we need 4 laws dealing with orders of protections on the books? Or can we delete them all and write a new one that's the best of these 4 that might actually partially take care of this problem? And at the same time, like, we need to have that discussion about gun registration. We need to have that particular discussion and say, look, none of these half measures are going to work. Like, you're either all in on this issue that has a proven track record of working in certain cases, but not all cases, or we need to figure out if constitutional rights are more effective. Because again, we're talking about these events that happen. They're emotionally charged events, but they're still incredibly rare. And I mean, what has been a success out of this entire situation is more security guards in schools, money given to private schools to put more security guards in. And that's something that our Harper's Bazaar buddies, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, right, they voted against it along with Gloria Johnson.
They voted against it 2 weeks before the thing happened.
Exactly.
This was stuff on the books. They opposed it 2 weeks before the thing. I don't know how they haven't had a gun held to their head with that vote. And we've tried to do it, but our audience is highly sophisticated and elite, but also small or smaller. But I like that. That to me says it all. They voted against it. The argument would be it's a politically performative vote. They're just going to vote no on everything until they get what they want, which is just universal gun confiscation or something.
Right. And I mean, and to be fair, like we don't have anybody in our party that would look that good on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. Like, Justin Jones could be the star of the 3rd Superfly remake from that picture.
Yeah. I don't know. Hold on. Let's think about this. Who could be a superstar on the cover of Harper's Bazaar? Like, let's look at this picture.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans can't compete with that.
I know. I mean, look,
it's like straight out of Judas and the Black Messiah or something. Like, it's iconic, right?
Yeah, it is. I hate to admit it, but you're right.
And that's why Gloria's not anywhere near it. I mean,
I know. I made the joke earlier that it's because she's not black, but I think it's more likely because she just is ugly, which is the darker truth, perhaps. So anyway, Jerod, it was good chatting with you. Hang around after this. We'll wrap it up. I'm gonna close out the show, take you down. Again, if you haven't read Jerod's article on red flag laws, I think it is the best piece I've ever read on red flag laws. It's exhaustive. It takes into account both sides of the conversation. It's very good. And the only other perspective you'll read on that is that they are good and here's why we need them. So it's good to have a substantive counter argument to that. So, Jerod, thank you.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, well, that's our show for tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next week. Tomorrow, I'll throw this up here real fast. Tomorrow is, how do I get down from here? There. Tomorrow we have Megan's Nashville Savvy. It's tomorrow at noon. She's going to be talking about the special session, and then Jerod's, who you just heard from, is going to have his show on Friday. And I'm just realizing that there's not a space between that slash and Jerod's name. That is really irking me right now. But that's our show for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next week.